Hello there and welcome back to the Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for another crafting project. Today I have another beaded beetle brooch project for you all. Again, say that 10 times fast, beaded beetle brooch. But this time I was inspired to make one that was very directly in vein with circuit boards or motherboards, very much inspired by the classic green circuit board like this with little beads filling in the microchips and things like that. Using a variety of materials including sequins, seed beads, different glass beads, rhinestones, threads, and wires of all different shapes and sizes, I wanted to create a beetle that looked almost like a little miniature droid from like something out of Star Wars. We all know how much I love science fiction and cyberpunk and that sort of thing, so I wanted to make this beetle look very much like a miniaturized and yet sparkly robot, something that could, jump off my shoulder and do reconnaissance if needed. So let's jump on in and I'll show you what I came up with. Alright, here we are above my desk, and yes, these are some cat print flannel pajamas that you see covering my knees below, but we're just going to ignore that. And this marker I have here will not draw in felt, so let's reach out for something else. I think I'm going to grab a Sharpie here in the end. But I have all different sorts of beads sitting around here. You can see I have some of those like kind of classic striped, multicolored, opaque glass. I think these are check glass seed beads. Various check glass seed beads, various different green sequins, different colors of metallic sequins and seed beads sitting out, and random little bits that I've been collecting over the last 20 years. I've been making jewelry and things ever since I was a little kid, so I have old clasps laying around that might work for this, all kinds of funky little beads I thought might look more technical and like mechanical and would give a good broken computer kind of look. So I'm going to start by drawing on my little head, like whatever the head, thorax, and whatever the different parts of the beetle are. They kind of have like this middle section, and then there's the head, and then the rest where like the wing casings would be. But I'm going to start by filling in the head with sequins and beads. I do this for most of these days. I am grabbing a satin finish green sequin and then a little gunmetal size 15 seed bead to hold those on. So I'm coming up through the felt, threading on a sequin, threading on a bead, and then I'm just going back through the sequin so that the bead holds the sequin onto the surface of the felt. And I will fill in the entire head with that sort of design, or the same kind of repeating idea. And then for this one, I actually did intersperse a few different sequins. So I threw in a couple of silver holographic sequins and then a couple of larger green sequins in here as well, just layering those underneath the green satin. I think the green satin here are a size 5 sequin, flat and satin finish of course, but I layered in a couple of holographic sequins in a larger size and a couple of larger green sequins, in addition to some size 4 matte gold sequins as well, just to get both silver and gold in here because I wanted to be able to wear this with any color of metal. And then I also just wanted this to have a little bit of a layered, scaly kind of look up here, an iridescent, reflective finish with a slight sparkle, because the satin finish sequins don't shine exactly, I guess they gleam, but they do not sparkle like a regular sequin would. So I mixed in a few other sequins in there, and then even a few neon yellow seed beads since I had those laying around as well. So mostly satin green, but a few other metallics thrown in there just for a bit of a different look. Of course, from far away, none of that will be very noticeable, but alas, I'm up close. Now for this central sort of collar part of the beetle here, I have a black glass bead that I'm going to use in the center there, and then I have these weird little tube beads. I can link to them below. I bought them online. At least I think I can. I think I got them from General Bead, which may not be on Etsy anymore, but they are still in San Francisco, so if you're near there, there's a huge bead store called General Bead that I usually order beads from online, but they may no longer be on Etsy. I'll have to figure that out. But they had these lovely tube, like silver colored tube beads that looked very much like something you would find on a circuit board, so I picked those up online for really inexpensive. And then here I'm using a broken kind of twist clasp end on either side of one of those beads to create a sort of, I don't know, well, not steampunk, because if I added rust to this, perhaps it would be steampunk. I wouldn't mind making a steampunk version of this, especially with like a bunch of verdigris, so it really looked like turquoise and copper. I think it'd be super fun. I should maybe do that next. But I'm just adding that black glass bead. It's sort of a rectangle faceted bead beneath those little silver beads. And then the rest of this, I'm going to go around the edges of the black bead with these gunmetal 3-sided cut glass, check glass seed beads here. These are probably a size 11, I think. And they are the faceted kind of. They're not Charlottes, which is a different kind of seed bead. We can get really specific with the different names of beads. But alas, I just, have what's pretty. But I'm just going to ring that black glass bead with these to almost make it look like sort of a bezel some sort of setting that this glass bead is sitting in. Most of this is going to get lost and hidden by the next step. And I am just using a beading needle for all of this, and in the end, this beading needle got extra destroyed. Oh my. So I'm grabbing some embroidery floss here in various shades of green. I'm mixing strands of that together to create like a verdigris, a multicolored thread here. So I'm taking a couple strands from each color of green and mixing them all together so I can have this color. And then I'm just going to do French knots to fill in the rest of this buddy's collar. So I'm wrapping that yarn around the needle 3 times, pulling it back through, twisting it back through to create this little French knot. If you've seen any of my other videos of this style of brooch, you've seen me do a lot of French knots. It's a really good technique to fill in a lot of area. And again, like if you don't have a ton of beads, you can use French knots, which are quite an inexpensive way to fill in a ton of area because, of course, embroidery floss is not too pricey. And the nice thing about this is you could do solid color French knots. You can do like a gradient. You can start with a darker color, move to a lighter color, and use it for shading in that way. Or you can use the kind of multicolored tie-dye effect of using different colors of thread like this to get a kind of mottled and, I don't know, I want to find the word that's opposite of uniform. Ununiform, unique kind of a look. Ugh. My vocabulary is not coming out to play, unfortunately. But I'm just filling in that entire little stripe on one side of the glass bead with French knots, and I will do the other side the same way. We are here at 1,000 times speed. And again, these take a long time to make. Just to fill in this little area with French knots probably took me, like just to fill in both sides, probably took me almost 40 minutes. So, you know, this takes a while, and hence why we have to speed up the footage a little bit here. I'm just wrapping the needle 3 times, pushing it back through, holding those twists in place as I thread the needle back through the felt. Then I'll come up right next to it, and again, wrap the needle 3 times. If you want a smaller French knot, you can wrap the needle fewer times, just twice, or you can use fewer strands of embroidery floss. Here I have the full 6 strands, I believe, because I wanted 2 strands of each of the different colors of green I was using. And there are children playing outside in the yard next door, so if you hear screaming in the background, I promise that's all that is, strangely enough. Now here I'm deciding what I want to do for the wing casing area, the back of the beetle here, which won't end up looking anything like wing casings, but that's alright, because these are fantasy robot beetles anyhow. So I've arranged these rhinestones in a formation I like, with a couple of those, again, long tube, silvery colored tube beads as well. And I was just taking a picture with my phone of the arrangement in case I forget or it gets messed up, and I want to be able to reference what my original idea and pattern was for this while I was laying it out. And I probably will sneak a couple of these larger square sequins in green underneath these tube beads down the center. Just trying to do something a little bit geometric to start myself off down here. These are just sew-on rhinestones. These are some vintage ones that I just have in my stash, but you can find these online as well. There are many different ways to rhinestone a thing, and this is just only one of them. Of course, there are like Swarovski crystal beads, and then there are things that are set in little bezels like this, which I think are called chat-ons or cat-ons or something. Anyway, and then there are like rhinestone trims and like ribbons of rhinestones and things. So different ways to get rhinestones onto a thing. There's also heat fix rhinestones, which are flat backed, and you can like melt them, the glue on the back of them to stick them onto things. That works as well. But I'm just using ones that you sew on like a bead, and that's what I'm doing here. And then I just put those 2 sequins underneath the main area where I want these long silver beads to be, and I'm just sewing everything on, you know, basically. And doing this kind of in a free-form sort of way, making it up as I go along for the most part. I have like a sort of pattern sitting here on the right-hand side, but it will get messed up the longer I go, and I didn't take another photo of it, so after a while I just have to start weighing it. Again, this whole section is really inherently just like following my creative whimsy, as it were, just trying to keep things slightly in rows and keep the geometric idea of it going, but at the same time keeping it so asymmetric and freeform. So it's like trying to keep it like almost like a Klimt painting. That's why I really like these Tila beads. I think they're called Tila beads. It's spelled like Tila or Tila, but I think someone told me that it's Tila. Again, I haven't been inside of a real bead shop in a long time. I've never bought these in person. I've only ever bought them online. So Tila beads, these square glass beads here that do come in different widths. So the full square, the green ones you see on the right-hand side of the screen here, and like the upper right, those green have a Picasso finish on them, by the way, which is what this little verdigris finish on these style of beads is called. You've heard of perhaps AB finish, which is Aurora Borealis finish. That's when something has an iridescent finish on it. This has a Picasso finish on it. That gives it that sort of verdigris. But these Tila come in different widths. So they're always these like 2 wide, sort of maybe half a centimeter wide bead, but then they come in different like heights. So the full square and then very small little rectangles as well. So I'm sliding on different ones of those. This is almost like playing Legos with beads at this point, with these little geometric buddies, and getting them to fit in together and create patterns, interlocking them with one another in different rows. I have a really fun time figuring out how to fill these in, but it is pretty like freeform and creative again, so it's not like I'm doing a set pattern anyway. I'm just making it up as I go for the most part. I kind of like almost laid out a pattern for this one, but then as soon as I started doing the middle, I kind of broke out of my pattern and started filling in things as I saw fit. And I do have quite a few different types of bullion thread or like metal spiral goldwork threads laid out here. And I say goldwork, but of course those threads come in every possible color and different variation these days. So these are little orange and silver pieces of like coiled wire that are used in goldwork and metal embroidery, but I use them for my beetles quite often now, especially because it is just a very thin wire, so it can be crushed and made to fit into very thin, small little spaces. So I usually cut a lot of those into like almost bead-like sections and fill in any blank spaces at the end of my project with a lot of that wire as well. And I will use it a little bit more tactically today to create a couple of loops so it looks like there are cords and wires going around my beetle. And while I was trying to primarily keep this beetle in like shades of green and then metallics, I was incorporating a little bit of dark blue, like a cobalt kind of blue, a little bit of bright yellow and bright orange as well. I didn't use any red in this. I was trying to keep my colors kind of limited to again lend towards a sort of motherboard-ish look, although there are some quite rainbowy motherboards out there, but I wanted to try and keep a slightly limited color palette for this. I say that, I mean, there's a lot of variation in this, especially because of the shades of green. And using all 3 metallics, I actually do have a couple of copper Tila beads on this buddy as well, so that I could wear this with any color of metallic in the future, and also wear it with black or brown in the future, hopefully, with anything. I wanted it to be universal enough to fit a lot of different outfits, but at the same time, try and keep a semi-limited color palette so that it would look, again, like a motherboard when I was finished. And once again, I am hoping I'm making any sense, which is quite usual for me when describing pattern drafting, but I guess also for this as well. And that is the trouble with trying to describe any sort of artistic or creative process, I suppose, in terms that make sense. In some ways, it's like I can explain the techniques, but it's hard to explain my decisions and why I choose to put certain things where, or like why I select a certain like variety of materials over others. Sometimes it feels just quite intuitive, and that is the sort of thing that's hard to explain because I'm the only one who has my brain, as it were. But I'm just going through here and again filling in little rows here, using mostly those Tila beads, but also various seed beads, mostly size 11 and size 15 seed beads. Sometimes people ask me about my beading needles also. I just buy the cheap little packet of beading needles at the bead section at Michael's Crafts. They also have beading needles back next to the embroidery floss, and I've bought those as well. I use either, but I don't use any special beading needles. People have told me that mine seem to be very sturdy. I don't know, maybe I'm just... I feel like I'm pretty rough on them. I do, again, for one of these beetles, I will use 1 to 2 needles. It'll take me several hours, most of these take like about half a day, if not a full day to make. And I will use 1 to 2 beading needles on these projects, and they become bent, and I stop using them after a while if they become too bent and twisted. So I just kind of consider beading needles to be slightly disposable. I don't expect them to last more than one project like this. And the project to me is more important than not having to buy more beading needles. Luckily, they're pretty inexpensive, especially at places like Michael's where you can use a coupon. And once I had the lower part of the beetle all filled in with beads and sequins, etc., I decided to go ahead and put in a few sequins in with the French knots above. So I just grabbed some of the flat matte gold sequins in the size 4 and started slipping those in, kind of filling in between the French knots. There's not exactly a ton of space up there, but just throwing those in at random, like a little sprinkling of these sequins up here to make the rest, to kind of incorporate that area into the rest of the beetle a little bit better, just because it was so matte and like fabric-like compared to all the beadwork going on that I felt it needed a little bit of sparkle and like metallic in there. So I added those sequins in at random in that section. And you can see here around the top part of my beetle, I've added in a couple, well, 4 little sets of 2 of the larger check beads from the right hand side of the screen to sort of look like little connectors or tubes or wires, things like that. And I've just added those almost like eyes and then little ears kind of on the top of this. I didn't mean for them to be very anatomical in any way. I'm just sewing on extra beads for a little bit more texture. And then here I'm using longer pieces of that Boolean wire to look like cords or connectors, tubing on the different sides of the French knot sections. And I've got orange on one side, and I'm going to use like a cobalt blue colored wire on the other. Again, just trying to make this look a bit like a droid or some sort of robot, and yet also a circuit board. Like a robot that's like missing its cover or something, basically. This could use some plastic wing casings. Poor little guy. His exoskeleton perhaps is missing. But once I'm happy with all my beadwork and pretty much done, I'm going to fold all the excess felt to the underside of my beetle here, putting little snips and clips where I need to if possible, without snipping any threads, of course. Just turning everything to the underside and then stuffing this with extra pieces of felt if necessary. But I'm kind of pinning that in place with a couple of bent pins that I keep here on the desk for this purpose. And just folding all this on the inside, and then I will stitch it down with stitches won't be seen on the outside, but it's all just kind of messy stitching on the back to hold this in place because it will all be covered eventually. So I'm just stitching all this stuff folded under, I guess. If you've seen my other brooch videos, you know what I mean. There's like random thumping and jumping around going on upstairs, but it's too small to be a human, so I'm quite certain we have cats with zoomies jumping around upstairs, and that's what the little thumps in the background are. So if you hear anything, it's probably kittens. We have children playing outside and kittens playing upstairs. We're just lucky no one's mowing a lawn, because now that it's summertime, that is my biggest hazard whenever trying to record voiceovers is people mowing their lawns. But now that I have most of that kind of in place structurally in the back, I'm going to cover it all with a piece of felt to keep everything a little bit smoother, and again add additional padding back here. I'm just sewing this on with blanket stitch, and again just that same Gutermann thread on my beading needle to do all of this, which I will grab a little bit more of here so that I can sew on a piece of buckram to the back of this to again add even more stability to the back. Just using blanket stitch and little straight stitches for most of that, whip stitching things into place where need be. Again, I'm not very concerned at this point about what it looks like. It's all going to be covered at this point. So I've grabbed some thicker wire here to go ahead and make the legs and antenna for this one. Usually I do beaded legs and antenna, but this time I thought using just a straight smooth wire, well, not straight, I'm about to bend it into all the different little legs and such, but like a smooth wire would look good for my more technical beetle here. So I'm just using smooth wire for this. This is just a brass wire that I had laying around, and it's more stable than the other stuff I usually use for the beaded legs anyhow, so this might be a little sturdier, and I just thought it would be a different sort of look for my more robot-like beetle. But I'm just bending that wire into little leg-like shapes. Of course, if you're making a semi-realistic bug, they usually have 6 legs, so I'm keeping that in mind, and then they have the 2 antennae coming up out of the head, so I will focus on that. I am just going to bend these into shape and then sew them onto the main body, onto the buckram of the beetle behind this like this. Again, just whip stitching and blanket stitching those on. Just getting them on there, you know? It doesn't have to be pretty. It's, again, all going to be covered in the end. And it's on the back as well, so even if I weren't covering it, it's still no one will ever see these stitches, so I'm focusing on getting it structurally sound as opposed to stunning, you know? And of course, the most annoying part of doing the legs, and anything post-legs at this point, is that the thread just keeps getting caught on the legs, which is incredibly irritating, if you're me and impatient. Which, you know, most people are impatient, I should think. And I try to bend these as much as I can before I sew them on, but then I just do my final adjustments of bending them once they're onto the beetle, like so. I'll just sew my antennas on up to the top here, the same way, anchoring things to the felt and to the buckram. Then, of course, my second to last step here is to anchor the pin back onto this. I have been buying like nicer quality pin backs than the ones you can get at the regular craft store, so I again can actually link to these pin backs below as well. They are a little bit more expensive, but because I make these, you know, for camera and for use, I figured I would splurge for nicer pin backs. They're not like sterling or anything special, they're just nicer quality than the craft store kind. And I will sew all the way through the beetle to sew these on here and really anchor them in place. And then again, there will be another piece of felt in addition on top of these that will hold it in place as well. So, but I like to have it anchored into the beetle so that when I'm using the pin back, everything feels secure. But yes, my final step here is to cut a piece of felt that matches the back like outline of this beetle perfectly. And then I will grab my Sharpie again and mark where I need to put slits into this piece of felt for the pin back to slide through. So that's what I'm going to do here after I cut this to size. Again, I'm just holding it up to the beetle, making sure I cut this to be a perfect match for the back of this. You can also use leather for this, or faux leather. I've seen used for this, like suede or shiny leather as well. But I've just marked where those pin backs need to go through this, and I'm just putting little slits with embroidery scissors into this piece of felt. And I will slide the two ends of my pin back through those little holes I put around my pin back so that I just have the bar of the pin back and the closure through the felt and everything else is covered. And now we can see why I don't mind if my stitches are messy, because this is the last bit of stitching that will cover everything. So I'm just going to go around the edges of this piece of felt here, stitch it down with blanket stitch. If you were going to be precise about this, it would look very nice and finished. Of course, I'm not going to be that precise. It's fine. Once again, it's the back. No one will see it. And all will be okay in the end, even if my stitches are messy. But just going around here and anchoring this last piece onto the sides of the beetle. Once again, trying not to get my thread stuck on all the little legs. But then this little beetle will be finished. I think it needs an R2-D2-ish name, being a little droid beetle. So let's call it BT11, you know, because it kind of looks like, this kind of sounds like beetle, BT11. So this is the BT11 droid. It's a new model coming out of Sinar Systems and helping you to infiltrate Imperial facilities as need be, you know. But I am very pleased with how this little beetle brooch came out. Another beetle brooch made with a beading needle, aka a beetle. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but perhaps I will make some more droid or robot inspired beaded beetles in the future to join BT11 here. I hope you enjoyed seeing how this brooch project came together today, and thank you as always for watching. I'll be back here with more vintage fashion, sewing, costuming, and occasional crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!